Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're stepping straight into the flight deck of the Bombardier Q400. We're going to lock in on a very specific, absolutely crucial scenario, the exact emergency checklist for the DEICE timer caution. Look, when you're dealing with aircraft systems, especially anything related to ICE, there's literally zero room for guesswork. You've got to know the procedure cold. By the end of our time together today, you won't just be familiar with this checklist, you're going to have it memorized completely effortlessly.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Picture the scenario. You're in the cockpit, cruising along, and suddenly, boom, that amber caution light illuminates. It reads, DEICE timer. The clock is ticking. You need to act, but you need to act strictly according to the manual. So what's your exact sequence? Having a flawless mental map of this flow isn't just about passing a check right? It's about absolute safety and laser precision when the pressure is really on. So here's our roadmap. We're going to cover 1. The DEICE timer caution itself. 2. Step 1, which is monitor advisory lights. 3. Step 2, switch to manual. 4. Step 3, cycle is required. 5. Step 4, escape icing conditions. And finally, 6. The 624 dwell time rule. All right, let's get into it.
Section 1. The DEICE timer caution, the initiating event.
To effortlessly build a mental map of the specific Bombardier Q400 cockpit flow, I want to give you a super simple memory trick. Just remember the acronym MMCE. That stands for Monitor, Manual, Cycle, and Escape. If you can lock MMCE into your brain, you've pretty much got the entire structural backbone of this procedure down. Every single time you think of that DEICE timer caution, just let your mind immediately jump to MMCE.
Moving on to Section 2. Step 1. Monitor advisory lights.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that your very first crucial step is actually observation, not action. The exact text states, DEICE boots advisory lights, monitor. You know, human nature in a high-stress situation makes us want to just immediately start flipping switches and fixing the problem, right? But the procedure explicitly dictates that you've got to hold your horses and first simply monitor those advisory lights. You're gathering info before you do anything else.
And why exactly are we monitoring? Well, because of a massive, critical condition in the text. The manual states, if DEICE boot sequencing is incorrect. That tiny little word, if, is the trigger for the whole rest of the checklist. The physical steps we're about to cover, they're only triggered if your monitoring reveals that the sequencing is indeed incorrect. If it is, well, then we move to the next phase of our MMCE framework.
Which brings us to Section 3. Step 2. Switch to manual.
Okay, so if the sequencing is incorrect, the text dictates our next moves. First, airframe mode selector, manual. Next, airframe manual selector, cycle as required. Now notice the stark difference here between the mode selector and the manual selector. In an emergency, it's incredibly easy for the brain to kind of blur these two together. You absolutely must ensure you never confuse the mode selector with the manual selector. So first, you change the mode to manual, only then do you interact with the manual selector itself. Make sense, right?
All right, Section 4, Step 3, cycle as required. So the absolute crucial point is right here in the parenthetical text. The manual explicitly says, airframe manual selector, cycle as required. That obviously stands for as required. You aren't just endlessly flipping the selector back and forth without thinking. You're doing it specifically as the icing situation on the airframe requires. You are now actively managing the system that the automatic timer failed to manage. You're the computer now.
Next up, Section 5. Step 4. Escape icing conditions.
Exit icing conditions as soon as possible. We really need to treat this exact phrase from the source text with the extreme gravity it deserves. I mean, this is the ultimate mandate of this entire checklist. Think about it. You've monitored the lights, you've switched the mode to manual, you're cycling the selector as required to keep the airframe clean. But your overarching goal, the permanent fix to this whole emergency, is to fly the aircraft out of those icing conditions immediately. Just escape.
And finally, Section 6, the 624 dwell time rule.
I want you to visually burn this number into your memory right now. 6. The first note in the text states, dwell period at each position should be approximately 6 seconds. Listen, when you're manually cycling the selector, you don't just flick it back and forth really fast. You hold it. You allow a dwell period of approximately 6 full seconds at each position to make sure the DEICE boots inflate properly and actually break that ice. Now let's hit the second crucial metric, 24. The final note in the text strictly dictates allow for a dwell period of not less than 24 seconds before commencing subsequent inflation of boots. So you hold for 6, right? But then you got to wait for at least 24 seconds before you start the next inflation. Why? Because this allows the ice to build up just enough so that the next inflation will effectively crack and shed it, rather than just inflating underneath a totally pliable layer of ice.
To really wrap your head around this, think of this timing kind of like a clock face to make the 624 rule tactile and really easy to remember. You've got a 6-second active dwell per position, followed by a mandatory minimum 24-second waiting period before you go again. It's a very deliberate, measured rhythm that you absolutely must maintain while you're simultaneously working to exit the icing conditions as soon as humanly possible.
All right, let's rapidly fire through the exact source text sequence one last time to test your memory of the MMCE flow and that 624 rule. The DEICE timer caution illuminates. What do? First, monitor the DEICE boots advisory lights. If the sequencing is wrong, you take action. Change the airframe mode selector to manual. Then, use the airframe manual selector to cycle as required. Your primary flying goal is to exit icing conditions as soon as possible. And while cycling manually, you always remember the notes, an approximate 6-second dwell per position and a wait of not less than 24 seconds before the next inflation.
So here's my final challenge to you. You've learned MMCE. You know how to monitor, switch to manual, cycle, and escape. You know the exact text of the Bombardier Q400 manual. But when that amber caution light actually flashes in the real world and your adrenaline spikes, is your internal clock automatically going to snap to that 624 rhythm? Take a moment today to mentally rehearse this sequence just one more time. Lock in those numbers, and you'll be ready for absolutely whatever the skies throw at you. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.